Hey everyone, this is Cascade Components and we will be installing the V2 Evil offering link in someone's backyard with a dog. Starting the disassembly process, this was during pre-vaccine time, so we are wearing masks. First thing you're going to want to do is crack the bolts loose on the main pivot. Don't remove them all the way quite yet. Makes it easier just to deal with everything when they're loose but in place. And then crack your dog bone bolts loose. And then you can go ahead and unthread those bolts all the way. And then you disassemble the dog bone, connecting the rear triangle to the link. Sometimes they can be a little tricky to get out. It can help if you jiggle the rear wheel around in some cases. So now going on to the other side and loosening the dog bone bolts and taking those out. Now when you're pulling out the inner dog bone, unweighting the rear wheel will make it infinitely easier. Alright, so now the rear triangle is disconnected from the main links. So we're going to go ahead and loosen the shock bolts and remove those. Keep an eye out for spacers. Try and catch those before they fall on the floor and bounce all over the place. Alright, so now that the shock is unbolted from the link, we're going to go ahead and unbolt the link entirely from the frame and uninstall those. So just unthread that one bolt and then slide the link off one side, and you can push the main pivot axle out through the frame. Just keep in mind the order of the spacers. There are 2 spacers on the inside of each link in between the bearing and the frame. This was the first time we had installed a link with this particular coil spring. Further on in this video, you will notice that the spring changes. This spring is incompatible with our links. If you choose to use this shock, be aware of that. Alright, so now we are sliding the Cascade Components link on with the spacer already installed on the pivot axle. Alright, so now we are installing the spacer on the non-drive side of the bike. And I'm going to go ahead and slide the link over the pivot axle there. It'll hold itself in place, so you can just let it sit while you get the pivot axle bolt ready and installed. Just threading in that pivot axle bolt. Again, for the sake of keeping the install video quick, we're not going to dive into torquing all of the bolts to spec right here, right now. After you install the link, be sure to go back through and torque all of your bolts to the manufacturer's specification. So now go ahead and connect the shock to the link. Keep in mind there's that spacer on the inside between the shock and the shock bearing. Remember to install that spacer, otherwise there will be issues. And you'll notice here the spring color has changed. Shout out to Lost Bike Co. for having a spring in stock that fit this shock in the right spring rate. Alright, tighten down the shock bolt. Again, be sure to torque that to spec after you finish the assembly process. So now just wiping things down with a rag. These pivots can get a little bit dirty sometimes. It makes life easier if you have them clean when you go to install the dog bones. So here you will have to move the rear wheel by hand to get the spacing between the link pivot and the rear triangle pivot to be the correct distance. And when you get it to that position, you can slide the dog bone in to both the link and the rear triangle at the same time. Now we're going to go ahead and bolt the other side of the dog bone. Meanwhile, we have a dog in the background, tightening down the dog bone bolts. And now repeat the same process on the other side. You may have to wiggle the rear triangle a little bit just because of small amounts of flex or misalignment in the frame that may occur. Slide the dog bone in, and then the outside half of the dog bone. And now we're going to go and thread in the dog bone bolts. Now that the link is fully installed on the bike, you will want to go back through and check the torque on all the bolts involved in the assembly. Be sure to use the manufacturer's recommended torque specs. Our links are designed to use the same torque specifications. No deviation is necessary. Alright, so there you have it, the Cascade Components V2 Evil offering link installed. Before riding your bike, you'll want to make sure that you check clearances at all moving interfaces. For further details, please check our website, cascadecomponents.bike.